China's growth and development is powered by fossil fuels, which is why China's energy security is now a serious concern to policymakers. There are two fundamental problems. The first is a troubled, loss-making coal industry that provides over 70% of China's electricity. The second is dependence on foreign oil in a volatile world. 60% of China's oil must be sourced abroad, making China the world's largest importer of oil, replacing the United States. How to deal with each of these problems? What happened to the coal industry? For over a decade, a pillar of China's growth. What could be done to fix it? And what about reliance on imported oil? Much of it from regions not known for political stability and the ever-present risks of disruption in sourcing or transportation. There are other issues as well. The low or volatile price of oil and coal, and obviously pollution, an irritant that has become a menace. Monitoring China's energy security gets us closer to China.
Coal contributed much of China's economic boom. It accounts for 2/3 of China's energy supply. But all of this has come at a price. The coal mines and plants have generated pollution on alarming scales that have led many to question the country's economic model. The Chinese government is determined to cut industrial overcapacity and reduce the share of coal in its overall energy mix as part of efforts to cut smog and greenhouse gas emissions. As the demand drops, coal industry is hurting nationwide. Coal prices have fallen nearly 60% from 1,000 yuan per ton in 2008 to about 400 in 2015. Here in Xinyang County, Guizhou Province, where trucks used to line up for coal, the streets now run empty. Coal mine owners are suffering big deal.
Back then, as soon as coal comes out of the tunnel, it will be loaded onto trucks. No one asks about the price or the quality.
According to a report released by China National Coal Association in January, China had around 11,000 coal mines in operation by the end of 2015, with a total capacity of 5.7 billion tons. But annual demand has dropped to about 3.7 billion tons during the same year. The National Development and Reform Commission is trying to tackle chronic overcapacity in the coal sector.
To discuss China's energy security, we speak with Professor Yue Fubin, president of the China Institute for Coal Economic Research, Zhou Dadi, former Director General of the Energy and Research Institute of the National Development and Reform Commission, and Victor Gao Zhikai, Chairman of China Energy Security Institute. Professor Yue, you recently visited 4 coal-producing provinces and produced a report in preparation for Premier Li Keqiang's visit to one of them about the coal industry. What was the purpose of the report and what are some of the highlights?
Recently, Premier Li Keqiang went to Shanxi, went 7,000 meters underground, and spent about 2 hours investigating the mines. He paid the visit with a special purpose, and that is to help the coal industry in China get out of its current dilemma. Starting from the fourth quarter of 2011, China's coal industry met the end of its glorious decade and took a downturn. 4 years have passed without any signs of revival. The whole industry is now in a grave situation.
What are the primary problems that have generated this crisis in the coal industry?
The biggest crisis for the coal industry now is that almost all operational coal mining companies are on a deficit. Because of this predicament, they have to take action to remain in business, including extreme measures such as reducing staff salaries, downsizing, or compulsory unpaid vacations. This has seriously impacted coal miners' lives and put the stability of the mining area at stake. Some areas have already witnessed mass disturbances that threaten social stability.
50-year-old Zhao Jinde used to be a coal miner in Shanxi province. He has spent the last 30 years digging for coal in Jincheng, the coal capital of China. For all he knows, coal mining was his life.
说通知你，老焦啊，以后这个你就不用来了。当时听到这句话，当时的那个时候的心情。哎呀，第一个就这个铁塌下来呀，合同谁来合同一声，感觉凉意很。
China's coal sector used to employ more than 5 million people. Massive layoffs turned their lives upside down. Zhao's one of the few lucky dogs. Fortunately, Zhao had an electrician certificate. That's how he got his job as an electrician at Shanxi Shanda Logistics Services.
If you deal with overcapacity, how many miners might be out of work and what government responsibilities would then increase to take care of them.
2015年煤矿工人总数逐月递减。
In 2015, the number of coal miners nosedived, indicating the size and scale of downsizing.
政府呢，有的时候
In response, the government has taken countermeasures.
比如目前很长时间没有开下工资。
For example, Longmei Group of Heilongjiang Province has for a long time failed to pay their miners.
黑龙江政府就提出了
The government decided to slash the payroll, sacking 100,000 workers out of the total 200,000.
政府给他们联系一些新的
Compensations were made. Some laid-off miners were offered low-paying jobs.
非常低的生活费。
Other companies asked their workers to work in shifts. A batch of workers would have to take compulsory unpaid holidays and then return to work to substitute one another. In this way, the workers worked on and off and suffered partial losses. Worse, some companies simply cut off production.
Overcapacity is a problem in general in China, not just for the coal industry. We see it in steel and cement and glass and other kinds of industrial commodities. Are there any specific characteristics that have driven the overcapacity in coal? For example, different provinces competing for GDP or whatever.
长期以来呀，中国经济的高速发展。
Actually, China's rapid economic development has been highly dependent on coal, but has been suffering from a temporary supply shortage. Back then, business owners even had to pull some strings to get permits to purchase coal. Many investors spotted the opportunity due to this supply-demand imbalance. Coal prices have been rising consistently and were kept at a high level for 10 years. Tricked by the price hike, decision makers and coal mine owners all expected to see endless demand for coal and concluded that the demand would keep increasing at 200 million tons a year. From decision makers to strategic planners, everybody painted a rosy picture and increased coal production.
In an effort to cut oversupply and worsening pollution, the Chinese government has decided to halt new mines approval for the next 3 years. The country is planning to eliminate as much as 1 billion metric tons of coal output capacity in the next 3 to 5 years. That's 17% of its coal production capacity. According to a statement released by the State Council this February, half of the cuts in coal overcapacity will come through mine closure and the other half through company consolidations.
Describe for me the structure of the coal industry in China today in terms of its capacity, the number of companies, the number of large enterprises, the number of small enterprises. Just give us an overview of the entire industry, the coal industry, in terms of its structure.
目前呢，我们中国的煤炭企业呢，整个生产企业差不多有。
Currently, coal production companies in China number almost 10,000 in total. About 7,000 of them are above the designated size. 20 companies produce more than 50 megatons of coal per year. In the meantime, smaller ones that produce no more than 300,000 tons are collectively being phased out in quite large numbers. I want to clarify a misconception here. Being small isn't equal to being outdated. I always believe a mismatch between the resources and the scale causes the entity to be outdated. Say a large resource pool for a small-sized coal mine makes it outdated, but limited resources for limited-sized coal mine doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. The criteria shouldn't be the size, but the productivity, the utility of resources, or safety coefficient in production.
And if you look for an optimum structure, considering the drop in price, how would the industry look?
The ideal situation is roughly 40% of R4 and 60% of R8 in China's coal production mix. Smaller coal mines should be kept in a small number along with a few big ones, and things will be more easily managed. However, I believe there should be a limit to the size of big companies because otherwise there might be oligarchs. In a market economy with competition, oligarchs threaten the healthy development of industry. Therefore, I don't agree with some voices that advocate helping one or two companies grow into a super big conglomerate.
In the report that you prepared after your site visits to the 4 provinces, what were some of the primary points that you raised, and what were some of the suggestions that you made?
Generally speaking, we aim to address the root cause of overcapacity. The basic principle is that we should model it on Sir Reginald Fleming Johnston, who served as the tutor and advisor to Puyi, and never showed any hesitation and leniency when phasing out outdated production. As for the method, we believe the market should be allowed to play its full role under the guidance and organization of the government. We even put forth the idea of commercializing capacity in the market economy to address overcapacity, which is a new way of thinking.
So to design that kind of mechanism, how do you determine what the government does and what the market does? The market would seem to indicate that in times of low prices and overcapacity and a depressed industry, the weaker companies would go out of business. They'd go bankrupt. That would hurt those enterprises, but that would make the better enterprises stronger. But that would be a market mechanism. But sometimes that conflicts with different interests, say, of different provinces, because there may be a difference among provinces, and provinces want to protect their own enterprises for lots of reasons, some of them good reasons. So how can you let the market really work the way it should?
That is the reality we must face. Over the decade, the central government as well as management departments in the coal industry have been proposing the establishment of an exit mechanism for outdated production, but have seen no progress so far. The major reason is lack of coordination between governments and enterprises, and sometimes among departments.
In a recent report, the Chinese government readjusted its targeted energy mix for 2016. Under the new blueprint, non-fossil fuels will make up 13.2% of the country's energy, an increase from 12% this year. The ratio of natural gas will also increase to 6.2% from 6%, while coal usage will be reduced to 62.6% from around 64.4% in 2015. The plan may be easier said than done. With abundant coal reserve, energy security in China has been categorized mostly as a domestic economic development issue in the past. Dependence on oil has brought China to acquire interest in securing its oil transport routes and its search for oil production elsewhere. The Chinese government did not realize the urgency and importance of energy security until the late 1990s, when China's energy consumption reached a record high. But despite its efforts to diversify its sources, China is becoming increasingly dependent on Middle East oil. Today, some 60% of China's oil imports come from the region, and people began to wonder if it is safe to do so.
A lot of people still, more concerned about how much energy we can import, But on the other hand, if you keep a very high proportion of the energy supply from the domestic resources. In China's situation, we use too much coal.
So coal amounts for a little under 70% of China's total
energy?
Yes,
around that, at least 2/3 of that primary energy are composed by the coal for the supply.
So what percentage of China's energy now is oil, roughly?
15 to 20, it depends on different years. Okay. Now it's 16, 18% of the total.
Yeah, that sounds small, but it's concentrated in motor vehicles and important areas of the economy. So even though it's much less than coal, it's still a very serious component of China's needs.
Sure, because the total amount is too big, for the primary energy consumption. So even the less 20% means that China already, at this time, each year we consume around 500 million tons of oil. It's already counted the second of the world of the oil consumption. Right. The number one, of course, now is still the U.S. But China imports almost the same and even more than U.S. these days.
So how serious of a problem is that? Because now China is dependent upon regions across the world, whether it's the Middle East or Africa, that have, shall we say, are challenged in their political stability.
Yeah, that's really becomes one of the important concerns about any security issues, because we understand that the Middle East and most of the places, in Africa, they produce oil. Frequently come into unstable. So that means a lot of risk and uncertainties about the supply.
Because China now depends on imported oil up to about 60%, how to deliver the oil back to China, by pipelines or by large tankers, for example. And if you look at the shipping routes, of course, there are many sensitive areas like the Strait of Malacca, like the Strait of Hormuz, etc. And sea piracy now has become a major problem. So I would say that in the coming years, China really needs to get its acts together and make sure that the maritime security is fully protected.
If we go back a handful of years, it seemed like the predominating Chinese strategy was to acquire assets, either in whole or in part in other countries. So there's a host of issues regarding China's outward bound energy security strategies.
Yes, indeed. As a matter of fact, since the turn of the century, the Chinese national oil companies have made huge investments in overseas oil and gas assets. If you use today's prevailing market price as the benchmark and look at the value of all these investments, I would say they are almost without exception out of money. However, in running a major oil company, you do not lose your sanity over the oil price overnight. You really aim at the long term, which is 20 years down the road or 30 years down the road, and sometimes even 50 years down the road. On the other hand, I would say that making such huge investments in overseas oil and gas producing assets in many years in the past decade have been criticized by Western media as if it's a form of neocolonialization. But right now, when you are faced with the low oil price, people start to get worried whether there will be a drying up of large investment in oil and gas fields, mainly because in the oil business it's very long cycle. 20-year, 30-year will be the normal term for calculation. And if you do not make large capital investment, and oil business is very capital intensive, very long cycle business. And therefore, I hope people throughout the world will pause and really think twice that major investments coming out of China are actually playing a positive role, because it may make sure that money keeps going into the oil business, and then there will be availability down the road, and then supply and demand will not suffer a major disruption or major mismatch.
China's traditional approach to international diplomacy is we don't care what happens beyond the international border. That's not our sovereignty, that's your sovereignty. You don't interfere with our sovereignty, we don't interfere with your sovereignty no matter what, but we will trade for our benefit and hopefully for your benefit. There's increasing pressure on China as a global stakeholder to appreciate maybe what the U.S. has had to suffer with in terms of its apparent responsibilities in the world. Do you see a change in China's approach to the international community, both as a participant as a great power and for its own sake, in order to impose a kind of stability on the world which would transcend a national border on occasion?
I would say respecting each other as a country, respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of each other, and do not interfere in each other's domestic affairs remains the guiding principle. And whoever who abides by that will benefit. Whoever who wants to violate that principle will suffer. Of course, the world has changed tremendously. And I think there may be occasions, as you just now mentioned, that international intervention may be necessary. However, I don't think any country should be able and should be allowed to take action into its own hands and intervene in another country's domestic affairs unless it is being blessed by the resolution of the United Nations Security Council.
While thinking in security terms, the Chinese government is encouraging development of wind and solar power and use of autos powered by batteries or natural gas. The government has launched initiatives to improve China's energy intensity, or the energy consumed for each unit of economic output. It has reported progress, but still is far behind developed economies. Some experts believe the solutions still lie in coal.
Let's talk about the relationship between coal and pollution. We know in China today pollution is one of the great problems. Here in Beijing it's particularly obvious. So what progress has been made in terms of the production of clean coal technologies, number one? And number two is, as you look to the future in terms of the mix of energy sources, how do you see coal declining as a percentage of the nation's total needs?
Actually, the Chinese government puts great weight on clean coal application. 60% of coal exploited in China should be washed, sorted, and destoned before use to make sure they are relatively clean. At the moment, some coal-burning power plants in China have realized almost zero emission, boasting of world-class pollutant treatments. Busan Power Company Pudong Shanghai is one that has seen huge progress. Apart from the traditional way of treating pollutants, physical and chemical measures are applied to change the coal forms with liquefaction and gasification. China's processes in liquefaction and gasification are both among the world's top. Coal liquefaction refers to the process of generating oil from coal. China owns total proprietary intellectual property rights on this world-leading technique and has withstood the test with its model demonstration. That being said, as China aims to reduce coal overcapacity and promote the clean use of coal, converting coal to oil might be one option with great prospects. With the technology of conversion, we can consume the current stock of 300 megatons of coal pretty quick. There will be no overcapacity at all. On the contrary, we would even have to increase coal production. Then what about the picture for petrol imports? Our overseas dependence on oil has already mounted to nearly 62%. By addressing overcapacity in the coal industry, we're also discussing the future for energy security in China. If we continue to allow foreigners to control our petrol supply in exceptional cases like wars, plagues, natural disasters, what can we do if they cut off the supply? We cannot be so heavily dependent on others in this way. For energy security concerns, we have to strive for self-sufficiency in all forms of energy, particularly petroleum. With the conversion technology, we get clean petrol out of excess coal. It is like killing two birds with one stone, reducing overcapacity and eliminating dirty coal at the same time. Therefore, I am actively advocating for the liquefaction and gasification of coal in China.
既能解决了煤炭的产能过剩，又解决了煤炭的非洁净化利用。
How does the low price of oil in today's world affect China's plans for coal liquefaction and the conversion of coal into both gas and liquid gasoline? At what is the break-even price that coal liquefaction can be produced equivalent in terms of barrels of oil?
Coal oil conversion is turning solid fossil fuels into liquid energy. The physical transformation adds to the cost and makes it more expensive than extracting liquid petrol from the underground. This is the downside of the technique. If oil prices can be kept above $65 per barrel for long, our technique will become economically lucrative. But if only for energy security concerns, oil prices don't really matter. What we care about is having a strategically important technique in hand.
因为它作为一种战略性的技术，掌握在中国人手里。
The problem of China's energy security demands one solution. Do everything. Close inefficient coal mines to reduce capacity, diversify sources of oil, improve energy efficiency, allow market pricing to balance supply and demand, develop less polluting energy technologies such as coal liquefaction, subsidize alternative energy. In a shift of historic proportions, China now must engage the Middle East proactively. Consider President Xi Jinping's parallel visits to Saudi Arabia and Iran. The good news is that China is thinking long-term, although multiple sources of volatility impede forecasting. China's remarkable growth has come at the high cost of energy inefficiency and massive pollution. This must change. It is simply impossible for China's almost 1.4 billion people to live like citizens of Singapore or Scandinavia. New models of the good life must be found. China's economic success is astounding, but such success puts China under scrutiny. When China continues to pollute, buys overseas resources, or builds its navy to protect its trade routes, the world is now watching. So are we, to keep closer to China.